All right, hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about the Enlightenment and religion and how this plays a very big role in establishing the colonies. So we're going to start with essential questions. What are natural rights and who argue that all people are in fact born with them? What Enlightenment philosopher argued political power should be separated into different branches of government? And what infamous preacher argued people should be born again and delivered the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? Okay? All right, so we're going to start with the Glorious Revolution, 1688. You need to understand why this happens as it impacts the colonies. So it says suspicions in England, should be suspicions, in England were growing around King James II. He insisted on a divine right to rule, that he is sovereign, that God has given him this power, and almost that he is almost godlike, and he frequently rejected the advice of Parliament. He also revoked the charters of many English towns and offended many English people by openly practicing Catholicism, which we know has been pushed out of England. It says many worried he would lead England to a civil war. There was so much unrest over him. So it says many tolerated him because they thought his Protestant daughter, by the name of Mary, would succeed him to the throne. However, this dream was shattered when James II, his second wife, gave birth to a son, and now the heir to the throne was to be raised Catholic. So it says news of this birth triggered protests. Parliament invited William and Mary to take the throne, pushing James out. So a couple pictures of that. Here is James, okay, and here are William and Mary. William III, Mary II. So William and Mary be asked by Parliament to kind of push James out, which they do. And James flees, and this is a bloodless change in power. So it's not a coup with bloodshed. James doesn't die. Bloodless change in power is known as the Glorious Revolution. I have another picture, and it says here, Parliament takes charge of the problem. William and Mary are invited to become king and queen because they are Protestant, and James was pushing all this Catholicism. It says, but only if they signed the Bill of Rights, which we'll get to in a minute, the English Bill of Rights. Who invited them? Again, Parliament does. Okay, so here's the same thing. William and Mary are required to obey the new laws called the English Bill of Rights, and this abolishes the king's absolute power. So he is no longer the absolute authority in the nation. It says later that same year, Parliament passes a Toleration Act, granting freedom of worship to all Protestants, but not to Catholics and Jews. So I'm not sure how tolerant it was. But anyway, just make sure you know that William and Mary are going to sign this English Bill of Rights, which takes away the monarch's absolute power. This gives Parliament even more control. All right, which is leading to even today, what we see today in England. The Glorious Revolution offered the colonists, so this is why do we need to know this, offered them justification to revolt against Governor Andros. And during this revolt, William did offer the colonists some relaxed self-rule. So they see a change in the monarchy in England, and that ripples into the colonies, where a lot of the colonists start saying, why are we tolerating things we don't like? And they kind of revolt against the governor who's been chosen by King James and earlier monarchs too along that line. And then William offers some backing off. So you start to see the colonists enjoying that. Okay, so next, John Locke. So if you've been through civics, you should know John Locke. It says the Glorious Revolution set an important precedent, an important point that will always be followed. It showed that there are times when revolution against a king is justified, is needed. John Locke is going to write 2 treatises on government, and he explains political obligation. So, serving your country, but also justifying revolution if the government becomes oppressive. So it says, Locke argued all people are born with certain natural rights. And these are life, liberty, and property. All right, so here is John Locke. Kind of scary. There's John Locke. Here's his 2 treatises on government, his essay about civil government and how government should run. Okay, so you need to make sure that you know your natural rights. John Locke would say life, liberty, and property. Later, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Jefferson will pick this up and change the property to pursuit of happiness. So you need to know Locke because he influences Jefferson. Okay, so to protect their rights, the people come together. They mutually agree to create a government. So it says, in effect, people have formed a contract. This is Locke's theory, that they form a contract. This is where the people agree to obey government laws as long as the government ensures the people's rights in return. So as long as the government doesn't infringe upon the people's natural rights, life, liberty, property. So Locke's going to claim that basically monarchs are parties to that contract. If the monarch, the king, violates the people's rights, the people have the right to overthrow him. And it says these ideas have a profound influence on the colonies because they're going to read Locke, especially the more educated ones are going to read Locke and really buy into that. The thinking that government is here for me, I am here for government, a social contract, but if government becomes oppressive, I can do something about it. All right, so we see in the colonies that population is going to start booming and things are going to start changing. So you need to understand colonial life and you need to understand what the family structure looked like. So this population was explosive, lots of births, and you start seeing more people coming over into the United States, which is not the United States yet, but the 13 colonies. On average, colonial women gave birth to 7 children. 7. So that's on average. Most of them are going to give birth to more than that. Many will give birth to more than that and certainly lose some in the process. That was very normal for stillbirths. It was very normal for miscarriages because they, of course, do not have the health care that we do today. In the 1700s, the population more than doubled every 25 years. So it's insane how much the population is going to go up. It says in the 1750s, the population will reach roughly 2.5 million people in these colonies. Men versus women. Men, of course, have more authority and importance than women in politics, in government, and in the household. So married women have no legal status. They could own nothing. So when you entered into the marriage contract, if you're the woman, whatever you brought in, which was money, property, items, furniture, antiques, whatever you bring into it, passed down through your family, which you bring into that marriage, goes to your husband. And it is now his property. So as a married woman, I would not own anything of my own. Nothing. It would be in my husband's name, okay? Husbands are the sole guardian of the children, so I don't even have sole custody of the children technically. Although spouses never live apart in this kind of culture. But husbands have sole guardianship. So married women have 0 rights. 0 rights, okay? Single women, widows, have more rights, shockingly. But that's because there was no man in the picture. Often single women were sort of frowned upon. And they often were, it was suggested that a single woman should live with her brother and perhaps his family, or, have some sort of male, a person who was responsible for her and who could take care of her, but primarily take care of her financial issues. So the man would oversee any kind of property that she had. However, single women do have a few more rights and widows. They could own and manage their own property, technically, file lawsuits, or run a business. Why? Why do they have a little bit more freedom? Because they needed to make a living, and the government sees this. It's important these people can provide for themselves since there is no man. It says women are going to gain rights over time, but very slowly. All right, a couple pictures there. Here is a really interesting picture of colonial female life. You see four women in the picture, all of them working in the home. Okay, she's kneading dough. This lady's out here churning butter. This one's spinning yarn. This one's working over the stove. Okay, so the open fire cook pot stove, and the kids are here playing, and everybody's supposed to be watching them all at the same time. So the woman is supposed to take care of the home, work in the home all day long. It's not some glorious living. Okay, you're up before the sun, you go to bed when the sun goes down, you work the entire day. Lots of housekeeping and chores and things that are there to keep the family up. Important, providing the food, mending the clothing, that kind of thing, making candles, all of that was very important in this world. Also, main thing was the woman's role was to educate and take care of the children in addition to all these tasks. So her life was busier than probably even mine. Okay, it was crazy busy. So there was also issues with health and disease. Lots of issues: typhoid fever, tuberculosis, cholera, scarlet fever. So typhoid is going to cause huge problems, as you can see here in this diagram. Fever, rash, eye pain. A lot of people will die from typhoid. So it's going to be a big problem. Cotton Mather, a Puritan leader of the time, is going to work with enslaved Africans to find an inoculation for smallpox. And we have seen the effects of smallpox in the past when we did Columbus. Here is Cotton Mather, who worked with Africans to relieve them of that. More immigrants coming in, as I mentioned: Germans into Pennsylvania, Scotch-Irish into Pennsylvania. Africans are building a new world here with Gullah and jazz. Okay? So, Stolen Slave Rebellion. Very interesting that we have this here. A really cool picture. Is going to enhance the worry by Southern slaveholders about their slaves and uprisings. This one happened to be in South Carolina. So that adds to the culture there. Last but not least is the Enlightenment, which is an emphasis on logic and reasoning. So you have the Enlightenment and you have the Great Awakening, and these two are going to kind of fight against each other. I've already mentioned Locke. He said people are not born sinful, that society shapes their mind. And Montesquieu, who's going to be an Enlightenment philosopher you've read about before, Miss Albright's class, who read about the three types of political power, and said these powers should be separated. So this is where we get separation of powers: the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and executive branch. And I have a picture of him, Montesquieu, here. And he's going to heavily influence the later founding fathers to separate the branches of government, especially my man James Madison. Okay, and then we have the Great Awakening. So you have Enlightenment, this thinking of logic and reason and philosophy and books. And then you have this Christianity movement, renewal of the Christian faith. So Great Awakening is a revival, bringing people back to God, and a rebirth, if you will. And Jonathan Edwards, my favorite preacher of the time, is going to lead this movement, argue that you need to repent and be born again. We will do more on him in a little bit. George Whitefield is going to be his emotional speaker, and he's going to warn against listening to ministers who've not been born again. This leads all these New England churches to split into new light, old lights. Churches begin to embrace other ideas like Baptist, Presbyterian, Congregationalists, Methodists. The Baptists went over backcountry farmers. The Enlightenment and the Great Awakening is just going to basically push us, had different origins from different directions, but it's going to push all of us to more individualism, questioning the king's role over our life, and supporting basically political independence. So here's Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and here is George Whitefield preaching. Okay, Great Awakening. All right, go back to your essential